Mr. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring a bill to require the BBC to enable licence fee payers to vote on its strategic direction and aspects of senior salaries and programming, including referenda on particular issues, to provide for election of the BBC Trust and non-executive members of the BBC Executive Board by licence fee payers, to make other provision relating to the governance of the BBC and for connected purposes. I welcome the chance to present this 10-minute rule bill today, democratising the licence fee. This is a measure which I believe will enhance the BBC rather than weaken it. Like many of our countrymen, I believe the BBC is a great British institution. It has an umbilical cord to the British people. If it didn't exist, we might even have to invent it. On the question of impartiality, I do have issues which I will raise later in my remarks. Nevertheless, when respected journalists like Peter Sissons suggest that the BBC has an institutional left-wing bias, ironically, in some ways, it is good for people like me and other Conservatives. It means we cannot book complacency and that we have to be that much better than the centre-left in presenting our case. When it comes to BBC impartiality, I am reminded of that old maxim of Shimon Peres, who described the BBC World Service as, and I quote, making dictatorship untenable and democracy unbearable, but nevertheless worth having. I'm a regular listener to BBC Radio, including the World Service, and I would argue that the World Service is central to spreading liberal democracy around the world. However, despite the positive attributes of the BBC, of which there are many, I do believe that there are fundamental flaws, and that is why I'm raising this matter today. I've been campaigning for democratisation of the BBC licence fee for a long time now, raising it with the Culture Secretary and tabling a number of EDMs. I must admit I sometimes feel like that man on the Clapham bus. But let me move on to what I perceive to be the problems. First, the BBC is monopolistic, with about a third of TV viewing and half of radio. Monopolies tend to concentrate power in the hands of a few executives and take power away from ordinary people and customers, which is something we should worry about. Second, the BBC is often branded as anti-competitive because it does not have to make a commercial return on its products. One example was BBC Jam, an online education service, which in 2007 was crowding out other education businesses, such as Pearson UK from my constituency. In the end, it was rightly withdrawn from service. Third, the licence fee is a medieval anachronism, similar to our voting system in the UK before the Reform Acts of the 19th and 20th centuries. Namely, it is taxation without representation. It is disenfranchisement. We are not right to tolerate this in our politics, and we should not tolerate this in our public media either.
Quite right, Tim. Well,
the last point is quite crucial, Mr. Speaker. If you want to watch television, which is a basic hope these days, you must buy a licence. This licence fee does not go into paying for universal infrastructure, but is all spent on the BBC. Like all taxes, the licence fee is a coercive system backed by the threat of fines and prison. But what about if we don't like the decisions taken by the BBC Trust and its Director General? We might feel, for instance, that the licence fee is a regressive tax which penalises those on low incomes. Others will be upset at the salaries of senior BBC executives and celebrities. Many were angered at the BBC's assault on the late Norris McWhirter, a war hero and founder of the Freedom Association.
quite right.
The reality is that licence fee payers want choice. Some may want a beefed-up World Service paid for by reducing expense elsewhere, perhaps by cutting the $50,000 a day that the BBC spends on taxes, or by abandoning the hugely expensive and unwanted move to Salford. Some may want more spent on Radio 3 or Radio 1. And whilst licence fee payers will welcome the freeze in the licence fee that this government has negotiated, much more needs to be done. If we had choice, we might choose a BBC with twice as many news journalists as broadcasters, paid for by reducing celebrity salaries. But at the moment we are powerless because the BBC is currently run like a feudal monarchy. As licence fee payers, we are compelled to pay our dues, and if we don't like it, our only choice is to abandon television altogether. What recourse do we have? Where is the IPSA, or even a level playing field on freedom of information for the BBC, for example? There may be a statutory requirement for the BBC to consult its licence fee payers, but everyone knows that many of the current so-called consultations are a sham, with most decisions having been decided well in advance. When he was running for the leadership of his party, the Right Honourable Member for South Shields was calling, in a variant of my idea, for the BBC to become a sort of cooperative. I have no objections to this in principle, but the best way to ensure real democratic control of the BBC is to allow the licence fee payers at individual level to make the key decisions, and we must allow licence fee payers the chance to sack the grandees if they have grown out of touch with public opinion. This means that licence fee payers would be free to elect the board and the chairman of the BBC, agree the annual report and have some say over programme making and payment of celebrity salaries. It would be similar to shareholders having the ability to hire and fire their board, with one main difference: every licence fee payer would hold just one share and one vote. Licence fee payers would vote via the internet with a special PIN number, keeping administration costs low. The BBC could even call a special referendum for controversial issues, such as whether to allow extremists like the BNP to appear on Question Time. Senior BBC members and outside candidates could compete in primaries against each other. We could spark a genuine debate, a battle of ideas about the kind of BBC that we want and how it should spend our money. To those who say that democracy only results in the lowest common denominator, I say that this is untrue. Look at Classic FM and Sky News. There is a real demand out there for quality, and I have great faith in the British people. The BBC cannot continue, dare I say it, to be a kleptocracy, indifferent to the public who pay for it. Auntie pays out huge salaries to executives and celebrities alike. Her bureaucracy grows exponentially. Her undemocratic licence fee has become an anachronism in the days of multi-channel satellite television. If the BBC really does depend on the licence fee for its survival, then there must be some real checks and balances. What better way than democratising the licence fee?
Order. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in his bill. As many as are that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Nick Dubois, Craig Whittaker, Pauline Latham, David Tredinnick, Priti Patel, Mr James Clapperson, Mr Lee Scott, Mr David Nuttall, Laura Sandys, Simon Hart, Nadeem Zahawi and myself, sir.
Mr Robert Halfon.